Shalom from Israel to all of Daystar viewers around the world. I am Moshe Bar Tzvi, the producer of Israel Now News. We at Israel Now News are dedicated to bringing you the full story and the truth about Israel from Israel. It's written in the Holy Bible when David said in Psalm 43:3, "O send out your light and your truth. Let them lead us. Let them bring us to your holy hill and to your tabernacle." And God says in Zechariah 8:31, "I will return to Zion and dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Jerusalem shall be called the city of truth, the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. Always search for the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:31. I hope you enjoyed the program. God bless you from Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner.
In our top story, Russia has allied itself with Iran. In a troubling move, Russia has declared that it is Iran's ally, and any attack on Tehran would be considered an attack against Moscow. Russia's outgoing ambassador to NATO, Dmitry Tugozin, said, "Iran is our neighbor, and if Iran is involved in any military action, it is a direct threat to our security." Russia has invested heavily in Iran's nuclear facilities, which they insist are intended for peaceful purposes. Russia opposes the UN Security Council's sanctions on Tehran's nuclear program and has sharply criticized the United States for encouraging the sanctions. Russia has also recently accused Israel of provoking the United States towards war with Iran.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has expressed disappointment with efforts of the international community to curb Iranian nuclear development, saying that the sanctions employed thus far are ineffective and have had no impact. Netanyahu said that tougher sanctions should immediately be imposed against Tehran's central bank and the oil industry. The U.S. government is reportedly working through several channels to ensure that Israel will wait for further sanctions to take effect before taking any steps toward attacking Iran. U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, is in Israel in an attempt to gain assurance from the Netanyahu government that Israel will not surprise the United States with any moves against the rogue nation. President Barack Obama spoke with the Israeli Prime Minister about the serious consequences of a military strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. The U.S. military is taking precautionary steps in preparation for the fallout of a potential Israeli strike on Iran. 15,000 U.S. troops are currently deployed in Kuwait, and the U.S. has moved a second aircraft carrier strike force to the Persian Gulf area.
The U.S. and Israel have postponed their largest planned joint military exercise to date. Although both countries initially cited technical, budgetary, and logistical reasons for its deferment, top U.S. officials have now said that they decided to delay the drill out of concern that it could lead to an escalation with Iran. Thousands of U.S. and Israeli troops, planes, and ships were expected to take part in the drills, which were scheduled for April of this year.
Iran is continuing to blame the CIA for the assassination of one of its top nuclear scientists. Iranian police have detained several suspects in last week's killing of Mustafa Ahmadi Rashan. Iranian leaders initially said that the magnetic bomb attached to Rashan's car was the handiwork of the Israeli Mossad, but are now accusing the United States and Britain of involvement in the assassination. In a diplomatic letter sent to the United States, the Iranian Foreign Ministry says that it has evidence and reliable information that the CIA provided guidance, support, and planning to the assassins directly involved in Rashan's killing. A similar letter was delivered to the United Kingdom, accusing London of having an obvious role in the assassination. General Mossad Jazayeri, the spokesperson for Iran's armed forces, vowed that Iran's response will be a tormenting one. The enemies of the Iranian nation, especially the United States, Britain, and the Zionist regime of Israel, will be held responsible for their actions.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has criticized Israel for approving the construction of 2,000 homes in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. Ban urged Israel to freeze the building activity, which he said was considered by the UN to be illegal. Speaking at a conference on democracy in the Arab world, the UN chief accused Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, of illegally building on disputed land. Ban also noted his concern for the financial standing of UNESCO. The United States has cut off funding to the organization in response to its acceptance of the Palestinian Authority as a member nation. Washington was due to make a $60 million payment to UNESCO in November, but U.S. law prohibits the funding of any organization that recognizes a Palestinian state because it does not possess the internationally recognized attributes of statehood. Canada's Foreign Minister John Baird also said that Canada has decided to follow suit. He said that UNESCO will have to go to countries who support the acceptance of the PA to fill the holes in its budget.
Chief of the Arab League Nabil al-Arabi is warning that Syria may be headed for civil war. In an interview with the Associated Press, al-Arabi said that the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has failed to comply with the Arab League plan to stop the violence in Syria. Assad had agreed to remove Syrian forces and heavy weaponry from cities and to cease violence against citizens. Despite the presence of Arab League observers in Syria since December 27th, the requirements of the 22-state organization have not been met. Assad has granted members of Syria's opposition amnesty for crimes committed since the uprising began 10 months ago, but opponents of the Syrian government say that the offer is meaningless because the majority of detainees are being held in secret prisons without documentation. Members of the Syrian resistance based in Turkey have complained that Assad's forces have barred them from crossing the border into Syria to provide much-needed medical aid. Some 200 local activists protested Syria's refusal to allow truckloads of food, medical supplies, and other needed materials into the country. The United Nations estimates that more than 5,000 people have been killed since the uprising began in March of last year.
A pro-Palestinian group called Nightmare has teamed up with the Saudi hacker who claimed responsibility for posting online the credit card numbers of thousands of Israelis just 2 weeks ago. Last week, the group hacked the websites of the Israeli Stock Exchange, El Al Airlines, and Israel's Bank Leumi. The anti-Israel hackers informed 2 of Israel's largest newspapers before the websites became unavailable Monday morning. Hamas issued a call to intensify hacking attempts on Israel's websites. Sami Abu Zuri, a spokesman for Hamas, said penetrating Israeli websites means opening a new field of resistance and the beginning of an electronic war against the Israeli occupation.
IDF soldiers thwarted an attempted terror attack at the Salem crossing near the military court in Samaria. This was the second attempted attack in as many weeks. 2 terrorists were found carrying 11 pipe bombs, a handgun, and ammunition. The foiled attack appears to have been planned to coincide with the sentencing of Amjad Awad at the Samaria court on Monday. Awad was found guilty of brutally murdering 5 members of the Fogel family in Itamar last year. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences plus 7 years. Awad showed no remorse for the brutal killings of Ruth, Udi, and 3 of their children, aged 11, 4, and 3 months.
The Knesset Christian Allies Caucus and the World Jewish Congress teamed up to host the 6th annual night to honor pro-Israel Christian leaders. Dubbed the Night to Honor Our Christian Allies, the event was held at Jerusalem's Inbal Hotel. Members of the Knesset from across the political spectrum, as well as Israeli government leaders, joined Jews and Christians for the reception held in honor of Christians who have been steadfast in their commitment to Israel. This year, Bishop Daniel Williams was recognized for his commitment to the State of Israel and the well-being of its people. The Christian Allies Caucus, together with the Israeli Ministry of Tourism, also honored Jorgen Buehler, the Executive Director of the International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem, for his contribution to Israeli tourism. The Knesset Christian Allies Caucus is a multi-partisan caucus which aims to forge direct lines of communication between the Knesset, Israel's parliament, and Christian leaders, organizations, and political representatives in Israel and throughout the world. The World Jewish Congress is the international organization representing Jewish communities in 100 countries to governments, parliaments, and international organizations. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned now for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host Josh Reinstein, and we're here on our rooftop studio in Jerusalem. Our guest today is Steve Lindy, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Steve Lindy, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
The Jerusalem Post has been around longer than the creation of the State of Israel. How has the new challenges of the 21st century changed how the Jerusalem Post works within Israel?
Well, I think the whole world of media is changing, and the Jerusalem Post is trying its best to adapt to that. We're going to be 80 years old this year in 2012, and we're expanding in all different directions to attract different audiences around the world and here in Israel. And one of our main audiences is Christians around the world.
Well, Mr. Lindy, you know, in Israel there's always news breaking. You took over as editor-in-chief just recently. How have you been able to cipher for, you know, what's the big story of the day and what, you know, goes on the backbone?
Well, one thing about Israel, there's never a shortage of a main story. Every day we have big stories breaking, and we never have a problem filling the newspaper. There's always something going on, and it's always a major story, not just simply a car accident or something of that nature, which obviously could be tragic. But here in Israel, we have major world-changing events that happen all the time, and so it's always a challenge.
Well, you were heading to the end of January now. What do you foresee as the big stories of 2012 coming out of the Middle East?
Well, I think the big story of 2011 was certainly the Arab Spring and the incredible changes taking place in the Arab world and you know, in Israel's neighbors, Egypt and Syria especially. Now we're looking towards Syria because it doesn't look like the Assad regime can last too much longer. There are more and more people dying there and being killed every day. And it certainly doesn't look like a very healthy situation. Even the Arab League has got involved and sent monitors there. So I think Syria is definitely going to be a big story. And obviously from Israel's point of view, Iran is the big story. If Iran gets nuclear weapons in 2012, that'll be a game changer. It'll change the whole world, not just for the Middle East, but I think for the world in general. And I think Israel's main battle at the moment, and certainly this government under Prime Minister Netanyahu, is to make sure that Iran does not get nuclear weapons.
Well, one of the big stories coming up is the American election. That always has a huge impact on Israel. What do you foresee coming out of the election vis-a-vis Israel? Do you think it'll be business as usual between America and Israel, or do you think Israel will have to adapt to whatever the results of the elections are?
Yeah, I think both of those things are true. I'm not trying to be diplomatic here, but obviously I can't come out in favor of one candidate or the other. I think any candidate will probably be supportive of Israel. We're obviously watching the Republican primaries right now with interest. I think all the candidates are good candidates and are bending over backwards to show that they're more supportive of Israel than the others. And we're looking forward to seeing who wins and whether he has a chance to beat Barack Obama at the end of the year. I think that, you know, from Israel's point of view, it's all about interests, and America and Israel share very important common interests and ideals. And no matter what candidate emerges as the victor, both in the Republican and Democratic caucuses, I think the president ultimately will be supportive of Israel, as every president has been in the past.
One of the rumors that we hear about Israel is possible elections in Israel. How likely is that in 2012?
I don't think it's very likely. I think that the Netanyahu coalition is about as stable as any government coalition has been in Israeli history. And unless it's precipitated by some major crisis, and you can never tell what happens here in Israel, in the Middle East, anything can happen. So please, you know, don't take me on my word for this, but it seems to me that this government's going to last a long time and probably will be elected into another term.
Well, you know, there's emerging threats around Israel from Lebanon, the unrest in Syria, now with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. How likely would you see as an armed conflict in 2012 in Israel?
Again, I don't think that's likely, but anything can happen, and certainly it's a very fragile region and anything can trigger off a war. I think Israel's very strong at the moment. We're obviously watching very carefully the Egyptian border and are very concerned about the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists in Egypt. I think the same thing seems to be happening, unfortunately, around the Middle East, and and that strengthens Hamas in Gaza. And unfortunately, once Hamas in Gaza is strengthened, and if they feel brave enough to launch an attack in Israel, that could trigger a whole round of violence. But at the moment, things are relatively quiet.
There are literally tens of millions of viewers watching this show. What message, as editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, would you have to our viewers?
Well, firstly, please continue to support Israel. I think we need support all over the world. Sometimes we sit here in Jerusalem and wonder if the whole world's against us, and we know that's not true. But often the vocal supporters of Israel don't speak out as loudly and in the media as others do, as the opponents do. So I would say please continue to support Israel and also continue to come to Israel. In the recent 2 months, I believe, we've had an all-time record of tourists. I think in November alone there were 318,000 tourists coming to Israel, which is an all-time record. So please keep on coming. The situation is very safe, and the hotels are full. As you can hear from the background probably, it's buzzing, and it's a really wonderful place to be.
Yes, come join us in Jerusalem. Thank you, Mr. Lindy, for being on our show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, shining light from Israel.
Isn't it time for the unbelievers to discard these incoherent, illogical beliefs, theories, and conjecture? Isn't it time for every Christian, Jew, pagan, and atheist to cast off the cloak of spiritual darkness which enshrouds them and emerge into the light of Islam?
Have you ever stopped to think about what would happen if the Islamists won and their version of Sharia law was put into place? All you need to do is look at countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Sudan, and Somalia, and places like the Gaza Strip, and you'll see that those places are human rights disasters.
Across the world, we see that Christians are having a terrible time of it.
Christians in Iraq are deliberately targeted. The past 6 months alone, 7 priests have been kidnapped and 2 of them murdered.
All kinds of countries, we see Christians being persecuted, being oppressed, their churches being burned down, Christians being murdered, sometimes in very large number.
They were in the church for prayer when the car bomb went off.
The Christian communities in most Muslim countries now clearly feel themselves to be under strain. And it's noticeable, for example, that a town like Bethlehem, which was once predominantly Christian, now has very few Christians remaining.
Bethlehem is once a Christian city, but today Christians are only about 10 to 15% of the population here.
My father's been shot at 3 single separate times for one simple reason: carrying that cross and walking every day.
Where there are Christian minorities and where there are Jewish minorities in any one of the countries where there is an Islamic majority, they are persecuted, they are overtaxed, they have to hide their religion.
चंद इस्लामिक मुल्कों में, मिसाल के तौर पर Saudi Arabia, etc. में propagation of any other religion is prohibited. Even construction of any place of worship is also prohibited.
In the homeland of Islam, Saudi Arabia, the Vatican of Islam, you're not allowed to build a church and you're not allowed to carry a Bible. It's both an offense.
और अल्लाह ताला फरमाते हैं सूरह इमरान सूरह 3 आयत नंबर 85 में कि इस्लाम के अलावा कोई भी दिगर मज़हब अल्लाह सुब्हानहू व तआला कबूल नहीं करेगी। तो दीन के मामले में हम जानते हैं इस्लाम ही सिर्फ सही दीन है, इसीलिए हम दूसरे दीन का प्रोपगेशन अलाउ नहीं करते।
Look at the Taliban when they got into Afghanistan. They put out a fatwa to destroy the Buddha statues. That were there for hundreds of years and that were very valuable.
the Islamo-fascists who are attacking the world want to impose their beliefs on the world.
Not many people are aware of the fact that in Iran you'll find the so-called modesty police patrolling the streets. If women are caught wearing the wrong clothing, they could be fined or even arrested.
To women entering this shop in Tehran, a message saying all clothes sold here have been approved by the police. The length and size of coats, nothing too short, nothing too tight, and mostly in black. Women who shop here know there's no risk of getting a warning or being arrested for indecency.
من هؤلاء الذين يقررون لي ماذا يجب أن أكون عليه؟ لماذا تعاملوني كسيدة كأنني ناقصة الهوية وهنالك دائما صوت ذكوريا يقرر لي ما يجب أن أكون عليه؟
As a woman, if you, and all individuals are different, but if you are an individual woman with a strong character and you rebel against this kind of life, you run more than anyone else the risk of being beaten. Abused, your spirit being killed by your own family, by your own loved ones.
ولا بد أن نعلم أن الضرب عقوبة شرعية لا يملك إنسان أن ينكره لأن الذي شرعه هو الذي خلق هذا الإنسان.
هو لا شك أن الضرب هو يعتبر وسيلة من وسائل الإصلاح.
قال لي أنا ماني جاي أضربك، أنا جاي أقتلك. ومسك في رقبتي وسدحني على الأرض وبدأ يخنق فيها بنظرات يعني.
But the issue of men controlling women's lives goes much deeper. It can even result in murder.
Just another teenager with everything to live for, except that Heshu Yonez was trapped between two cultures. When she began a relationship with a Christian Lebanese boy, her strict Kurdish Muslim father slit her throat.
Chowdhury Rashid is charged with first-degree murder in the death over the weekend of his 25-year-old daughter, Sandila Kanwal. Based on what police say, this could be what's known as an honor killing, the murder of a woman, often by a family member, to punish her for shaming the family.
According to the United Nations, some 5,000 women and girls are victims of so-called honor killings every year. Whether it's because they've been seen talking to a man, refusing an arranged marriage, or even suffering rape, they're murdered for one reason only. They're perceived to have brought shame on their family. And it's often the family that carries out the sentence.
This is Aksa Parvez. Her father told authorities that he strangled her, allegedly, because she wouldn't wear a headscarf.
We are bound by the rules. If a woman runs away, she must be killed.
Good name is more important than the penalty. We don't care about the penalty. A good name is the most important thing in our world.
Islam does not countenance honor killing, but has nevertheless become part of Islam as practiced in much of the Islamic world.
What makes the miracles of Jesus even more miraculous? Standing where they happened, in Israel. Come explore Jerusalem, where Jesus opened blind eyes. Visit the hills of Galilee, where Jesus fed the multitude. Stroll through Capernaum, where Jesus lived and taught and healed. To learn more about standing where it all happened in Israel, visit www.goisrael.com. Come visit Israel.
Stay tuned for Torah Truth from Zion.
Shalom, my name is Ari Abramowitz from thelandofisrael.com. I'm here to discuss this week's Torah portion in the book of Exodus, the portion of Vayera. Well, Moses comes and he is starting the actual process of redeeming the Jewish people from their slavery in Egypt. And the 10 plagues are about to begin. And the first of those plagues is something that stands out. Everybody knows this plague. As Pharaoh was on his way to the Nile River, Moses met him there, and the Nile was turned to blood. Now why? Why the Nile River? Out of all ways for the 10 plagues to begin, this seems rather strange. Well, for one, the Nile River was where the Egyptians threw the firstborn of the Jewish boys. All of the Jewish boys were thrown into the Nile River and killed in the Nile River. But beyond that, the Nile River to the Egyptians was a god. They worshipped the Nile River. Every year, like clockwork, the river would flood and irrigate all of the land. They used it for food and for sustenance and for bathing. They worshipped this Nile. Now, they were now going to have a rude awakening and understand that the Nile River is not a god, and the God of Israel is the one true God. But it always sort of bothered me. Is the Nile a blessing or is it a curse for the people of Egypt? This such a natural resource? Is this a gift or is it not? Well, I think to answer this question, we could go back to the very beginning of the Bible, the beginning of the Torah, when this deceitful and duplicitous snake convinced Adam and Eve to eat from this tree that there was forbidden to them. And God was so angry with this snake that he said, your punishment is that for now on you will eat from the dust of the earth. Now, how is that a punishment? There's dust everywhere. The snake can get food wherever it wants now. It doesn't need God for anything. Well, that is exactly what the punishment is. That the purpose of this life is for us to reach out to God, for us to have a relationship with God, to connect to God. And God is saying, I want nothing more to do with you, snake. You have everything you need. Well, the Nile River was like that snake. It was God saying, I have nothing more to do. You Egyptians have everything you need. Now look at us in the land of Israel. We have very scant natural resources. We have to pray to God for everything. For water, for rain, we have to pray and turn to God. This is the land of faith. And we want you to come and join us and visit us in the land of Israel, the land of faith. I'm Ari Abramowitz from thelandofisrael.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Shalom from Jerusalem.
That's all for this week's edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner. Please join us again next week for all your Israel updates.